Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a few things. We'll talk about Spectate mode, Fractured Plane rewards, and we'll also do a low to mid resonance tier list. So let's get started with Spectate mode first. I was reading a post on Reddit the other day, and I left a comment myself asking just for some more information, basically. The post itself was about removing the Spectate mode because it was giving an unfair advantage. Now, after the feedback I received, is that this is unfair because when you go into the spectate mode, you can actually view both teams, meaning that a player from your own clan can go in there and see both sides. Now, this is different than just having all your players get in on your own Discord, viewing the match from multiple share screens, and giving advice, tips, positioning, etc. This is pretty game-breaking. You can do this in the Rite of Exile. You can do this in the free-for-all, and I know this gets done by a lot of clans where they have one player go in and just scan the map and give info. So the question is, if this is just going to be the way it is across the game in all formats, then we just need to raise awareness. If there's nothing that's going to be done where the spectate modes are limited to just the team or clan's point of view, then we just raise awareness to it so that everybody is on equal footing, at least in regards to this game mode. One thing I do think about as well is that if we limit it to the clans that you're in, then that kind of leaves room for spies to enter other clans, and then you can go in and use that as an advantage while you're viewing their team and feeding info back. Kind of adds another dynamic and plays along with the theme of this game in general. But we'll leave that up to the community to decide how they feel about that. In general, I think at the moment we just need to raise awareness that this can be done. I did try the spectate mode for the towers when it first came out. It was horribly laggy. I watched it for about 30 seconds and stopped. I didn't even make it to pan across to the other team. It was so terrible. So hopefully this has been fixed or the lag has been removed. If people are using it, I'd like to think that it has. Next up, Fractured Plane rewards. And this came up the last time, so I just want to kind of reiterate it. You don't see all the rewards. The first time you do the Fractured Plane, you need to complete 15 floors and beat it. Once you complete these 15 floors, these additional rewards will open up. And these are the ones where you need to clear it within a set amount of time with only so many deaths, and you get some of these more prestigious rewards. I still feel Fractured Plane is worth doing twice. If you have the time, you do it for the extra dust, and then you go through and do it for all the rewards that you can get, depending on maybe the class or the loadout that you have. Maybe they're not all attainable, but it still kind of makes sense to go through and do a second time. If you haven't seen it, you can go to minmaxrpg.com/warbands, and let me pull that up. And what you can see here are the locations for the paths to all the bosses. So if you're on floor 1, you'll go down, you'll go up that way, and then you go down again. When you clear that room, the portal will spawn and you go to the next floor. Same thing, you can follow it on to floor 2. Obviously, you need a second device to view this, or you have to memorize it, but this will get you through a lot quicker. It'll save you from going into rooms that don't lead you onto the path to the next floor, cut down your time, and hopefully helps you get some rewards. Also on this page, some more information, and if you haven't seen this as well, this is for Purge the Depths. If you're doing a warband, you go into the first room that's to the character's left after you zone in. Find the tile that matches here, and this will show you all the boss locations. They're also color-coded to show you how close they are, so that once you're kind of familiar with this, you know which path you want to take next to just help farm your warband points as fast as possible. So some cool stuff there if you want to check it out. So with that out of the way, let's start talking about a tier list. I still have a ton of mats to farm, so we're going to do that. And I need to do this tier list slightly different than just ranking classes from, say, best to worst. And the reason for that, when we talk about low reso, mid reso, or even free to play, is because there's an added dynamic that high reso doesn't have. If you're a high resonance player, say 7K, whenever you zone in, you're typically going to be either the strongest or one of the strongest players in that match. However, if you're a lower resonance, say 2K resonance, there's the capability for you to be the strongest player in that match, one of the strongest players, or even the weakest player. And this is going to dramatically affect things during the game. So I'm just going to start going in alphabetical order. We'll start with Barbarian. Barbarian has been hurt very badly by the recent changes. I made mention of this in a video the other day. The changes that occurred to Barb most likely were made to balance them at higher levels. Barb is a complete, really immovable object on defense with Undying Rage and everything that they had in their toolkit previously. The nerf to Sundered Legacy hurts their damage output. The nerf to Undying Rage hurts them on defense. And although they were capable of winning on attack as well, they've really been hindered, just completely overkill in the BGs in my opinion. The way that this changed down into the lower or mid resonance group is that Barbarian is probably one of the worst, if not the worst class in the game. In fact, I would say that they're not necessarily D tier or anything like that, but I would say that they're a C tier, and it really takes either a player that has master Barb, plays nothing but Barb, or is just a skilled player in general to really make the class successful or to add a lot of value to the match, to the point that if you are adding value as a Barb, you probably could add more value as a different class. The reason Barb as another thing against them is just because with the reduced cooldown or duration of the Undying Rage, the ability for them to occupy that objective is substantially hurt. So now it feels like Barbs can't do any damage, they can't take anybody out, and they just survive for a shortened period of time. On top of that, the idols don't retreat as fast as they used to on attack, so overall their impact on the match is really lessened or reduced. Next up is Crusader, and Crusaders are an interesting class for low to mid reso because your build is going to really determine what your class is capable of doing in that bracket. If you're a Crusader that plays an offensive type build and you are one of the higher or resonance or stronger players in that match, well, your Crusader is capable of getting a lot of takedowns and being very tanky at the same time. You'll be extremely difficult to kill, and you're very oppressive. You can use some builds that utilize the horse, essentially chase people down, keep up, and just keep moving objectives, whether it's forward or backwards, depending on the side that you are. Crusader's very, very strong with this offensive build. The issue for that lies when they get into a match where they're one of the weaker players. If you're a Crusader taking an offensive type build or even a horse style build into a higher resonance lobby, say with 5k players as a 2k resonance Crusader, you'll do very poorly. Doesn't mean that you can't have fun, but your win rate is certainly going to suffer overall. You won't be able to do enough damage to burst players down, and you'll die due to the lack of things of say, defensive cooldowns, and a lot of these offensive builds don't use the defensive Conjuration of Light, so you just won't have the survivability that you do against weaker players. Overall, I think Crusader in general, in the low to mid resonance range, is probably somewhere around a B tier. They're still a solid choice, still fun to play, and like I said, there's certain builds that are really, really enjoyable when you get the right match. It might not be every match, but you can still have a good time playing it and have a decent win rate, because overall you're not going to get into a match where it's completely lopsided or you're the weakest player every single time. Next up, Demon Hunter, and I think it's important to note for Demon Hunter that if we talk about mid resonance before this buff and before the update, if you were to go through the Demon Hunter list of players and just check their resonances, you would see an enormous amount of players with around 3,000 resonance playing Demon Hunter. Now, why are all these players around 3,000 resonance playing Demon Hunter? Well, this is a Blizzard game, so obviously they're playing it because it's good, because people in this type of game and other Blizzard games flock to things like Flavor of the Month or whatever's strongest. And I can't blame people for that, but it's very obvious that this is an indication that around 3,000 resonance, Demon Hunter is very, very strong. They have the potential to burst a lot of targets, obviously targets that are weaker or lower resonance than themselves, and they also have the capability at 3,000 resonance to actually kill targets of, say, 5k resonance, and sometimes even more when they have all their cooldowns. Now, with the recent changes, Demon Hunter is only stronger at all resonances, and this applies to this bracket as well. Previously, Demon Hunters of low resonance, say 1,000 to 1,500, are still very strong when compared to other players of the same resonance, but they suffer from the inability to do quite enough damage and just how fragile they are. So in low resonance, Demon Hunter would really kind of receive a different rating than it would at mid resonance, which is just part of the reason that I want to talk about all the classes in the manner that I'm doing today, as opposed to the manner I did yesterday. So for mid resonance, I would say Demon Hunter is possibly S tier, and for low resonance, I would say Demon Hunter is probably closer to B tier. You may get some kills if you're low resonance or even free to play, but you're not going to have much ability to actually shift the outcome of the match unless you're a mid resonance or potentially even a high resonance Demon Hunter. Next up, we have Monk. Now, Monk essentially gets nerfed. There weren't a tremendous amount of players at low resonance utilizing things like the Shimmerlin build. This was a build that was more commonly seen at high resonance and a little bit at mid resonance. However, at low resonance, Monk is really pigeonholed. You almost have to play a very mobile or CC oriented build. You cannot play the playstyle that you see a lot of, say, content creators play, where they either are high resonance, displaying games in which they get a lot of takedowns, or even if they aren't high resonance, they can just cherry pick the one match where they get 20 kills and a couple of deaths. In general, the monks at low resonance have to play very safe, very mobile to escape anything anytime they take damage or are kind of seen or caught. They utilize CC to set up kills for the teammates. And monk, I would say, is equal to barb at low resonance in terms of being C tier. You may find some that do well, and that's really going to be more representative of the individual player as opposed to the class. And I would say that a skilled player on monk at low resonance is probably just going to be good at almost every class that they do play. After that, we have Necro, and Necro, again, a very interesting situation. One thing that comes to mind with Necro right off the bat is that you are really, really funneled into particular builds if you want to succeed as Necro at a low resonance level. Reason for this is because Necro, you almost have to play CC type builds. You really want to be running something like the Baron set to increase that CC. And when you're low resonance yourself, you don't quite have enough damage to potentially kill the targets, but you can lock them up for a very long time. However, that leaves you subject to the rest of the players on your team, one, to know that you're locking up these targets, or your team to just kind of focus fire whatever's being CC'd and get enough damage on them in order to kind of change the fight that's going on. If your team is unable to do this, there's really no difference in you being on the Necro, and you'll lose a lot of matches where you might play well or you may CC proper targets, but overall it just doesn't have an effect. That being said, it is possible for Necros of below 1,000 resonance to actually work their way up to legend and even play with very high resonance players of around 7k resonance. So Necros definitely have the ability to get there, but you won't see a 700 resonance Necro running Corpse Lance or Summons or anything like that and being successful. You're really focused into CC type builds in order to do well. Now, as Necros gain more resonance, they still typically tend to favor CC oriented builds. However, they do have the capability to run more offensive style builds, but you'll then be subject to where you stand in that match. You can play a build that essentially runs like an assassin, get a lot of takedowns, you can move objectives. However, when you get into a match against higher resonance players, you really wish that you had that CC build. There's a lot of push for people asking for armories so that inside of the BG so that they can swap depending on whether they're on attack or defense, and in some cases just for the lobby that they're in. Personally, I'm a fan of this. I think it makes sense. In Rite of Exile, you know whether you're going to be on attack or defense. You can cater your build. You also have the advantage of knowing who you're facing, so you can alter your build, class composition for the team, anything like that. And I think it just kind of makes sense at this point. If there's multiple builds that are viable, it adds a little bit of dynamic to the game. And I think seeing more builds from, say, even the same players, depending on what side they're on, could be interesting for the game overall. Overall, for Necro, I think Necro is very strong. I would say that they're probably A tier in low resonance. And for mid resonance, I still think they're A tier as well. Very, very good. Probably the most balanced class overall for low to mid resonance, meaning they have the capability to do a little bit of everything CC, get some kills, survive. Very well balanced overall. As the resonance scales, and I mentioned yesterday, Necro just gets better and better and better, but that's a different topic. So we've got Wizard remaining, and what do I think about Wizard? Well, Wizard is interesting because I wouldn't quite call this low resonance and I wouldn't quite call it mid resonance, but somewhere in between at like 1,500 to 2,000 resonance, Wizard is dominant. There's this perfect little niche where Wizard has enough CC to lock targets down and still has the damage to kill them all by themselves. I've seen a lot of games with Wizards around this resonance, and they get 20, 25 kills, no deaths, 1 death. Very, very crazy games. They do it repeatedly over and over. I see tons of screenshots from the same players. However, what you don't see is when that 2,000 resonance Wizard gets into a match with 4 or 5k players, they can no longer kill them during that CC as well, and then they're kind of a sitting duck. Wizard has got a really bad rap at high resonance because the burst damage and just one-shot kill capability is so high that they get taken out very, very easy. Now, Battle Mage has made a slight comeback, but in general, you won't see a lot of Battle Mages at low to mid resonance. And I think for this conversation, we can kind of exclude them since the primary Wizards that you will see will play more traditional builds, whether they're burn style builds utilizing Banquet or they're using freestyle builds and CC type gameplay. Now, at Resonance below that, Wizard very fragile, similar to Necro, almost forced into playing CC oriented builds. As a Wizard goes up in Resonance above, say, that 2K and they get to 3K, well, they're faced with that same problem of not knowing what build they should be before they queue. If you're at 3,000 or 3,500 Resonance Wizard, you could be the strongest player in the match, and if you chose a CC style build, then you may have difficulty carrying the match that you get into if you're the strongest player. If you chose a damage type build and you're the strongest player, then you probably have a successful match when you enter. And the opposite, if you chose a damage style build as 3,500 Resonance and you get into a lobby with 6 or 7Ks, well, you're going to suffer. In fact, your team's going to suffer a lot as well. You'll have a lot of trouble killing anything. Everybody will be able to kill you very quickly. So it really kind of changes the Wizard's disposition. I'm going to call low Resonance, this 1,500 to 2,000 bracket, where Wizards really shine, just because I think it's important to kind of make note of that. And if you're a Wizard around that range, Wizard is very, very good. Probably A or even A plus in that range. And if you're a mid-Resonance Wizard, I think it's one of the worst. In fact, I would probably say it's around B tier. And that B tier is dependent on you running a CC style build so that you can adapt when you get into the matches with the higher Resonance players. The biggest issue of all of this, in my opinion, is the discrepancy in which low or mid-Resonance players can even be placed in a match. I know we've had some optimization changes, and I don't want to harp too much on that. I just want to talk about things that occur. And this is something like getting into a match, not knowing whether you be on attack or defense, having one match where you're the strongest player, the next match where you're the weakest player, and having different builds being viable depending on the situation. What I think is we really need some consistency here so that there isn't just so much variation from match to match. If you have a build that you enjoy in Battlegrounds, you should be able to play that build and enjoy the Battleground without crossing your fingers before you queue, saying, sure hope I'm the weakest player in this match, otherwise this build is going to be garbage. So I like to see some attention to this. I don't really know how easy this is to do. There's enough going on with optimization in general. So we'll see how it all plays out in time. They did say they were willing to make changes, so at the moment I'm just trying to be patient myself. Let me know what you think about the list overall, whether it's for low Resonance, mid Resonance, and feel free to even include comments for free to play as well. I want to conclude just by saying one thing we're starting to see the rise of is Smurfs, or whatever term you want to give them, but we're starting to see some lower or mid Resonance players that have foregone bumping up their Resonance in favor of secondary stats. And what this has done is really created an interesting dynamic, because some of these players can have 2,500 Resonance or 3,000 Resonance, and on top of that, they can still have nearly 3,000 per secondary stat. And this makes them very, very powerful, especially when they get into these lobbies with some lower or mid-Resonance players who don't have secondary stats raised at all. They just have what they've gotten from keys for Ivan Fads and just the gems they've leveled up on their own. So in no way are they comparable in relative strength to the players that have now invested thousands into regular gems for their secondary stats. Other games, you might call this a Smurf. So interesting to see what this game calls it for a term, but it's something that I'm definitely starting to see more and more, especially when I play my free-to-play character. A lot of these lobbies I play with 4 to 5K Resonance players on my free-to-play, and I'm starting to see an interesting amount of players that are going this route. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.